All right, let's dive in. Today, we are talking about a political figure who has dominated Israeli politics for, well, what feels like forever, Benjamin Netanyahu. He's a true political survivor, and we're going to unpack his long and, let's face it, very controversial career.
So, to really get a handle on who Netanyahu is, you've got to start with the public image, the persona. He's so carefully built up over all these decades.
And you know, this quote from one of his supporters way back in the 90s, it kind of says it all. It gets right to the heart of his political brand, this image of a tough, maybe even nasty leader who's willing to do whatever it takes. And that appeal? It worked. I mean, it really worked. The man has been prime minister for over 17 years. That is longer than anyone else in the entire history of Israel. But here's the thing. It wasn't some smooth, unbroken reign. Not at all. He's actually been kicked out of office twice, only to claw his way back each time. It's how he earned that reputation as the ultimate political survivor. So where did his core message come from? You know the one, I am the only one who can keep Israel safe. Well, to understand that, you really have to look at his backstory, his early life, and his pretty turbulent rise to the top. His journey to the prime minister's office was really forged in some incredible personal and national turmoil. Okay, so a few things really made him who he is. First, his dad was a historian with this very hardline view called revisionist Zionism, which basically boils down to a belief that military strength is everything. Then, tragedy strikes his family. His brother Yoni becomes this huge national hero after he's killed during a famous hostage rescue mission. And that event, that really put the Netanyahu family, and Benjamin himself, on the national map. He really exploded onto the political scene in the 1990s. And he did it by going all in against the prime minister at the time, Yitzhak Rabin. Rabin was working on this historic peace deal with the Palestinians, the Oslo Accords, and Netanyahu was having none of it. And when I say he went against it, I mean the language he used was just incendiary. He was showing up at these political rallies that were just toxic. I mean, he had protesters chanting for Rabin's death, even showing pictures of him dressed in a Nazi uniform. And then the unthinkable happened. Rabin was actually assassinated by a far-right Israeli extremist. In the aftermath, a lot of people, including Rabin's own wife, Leah, they pointed the finger directly at Netanyahu. They argued he had fueled the very hatred that made the murder possible. Now, another huge piece of the Netanyahu puzzle is his relationship with the United States, and you have to listen to this quote from 2001. He says, "America is something that can be easily pushed." This gives you a real window into how he's always seen that crucial relationship as something to be managed, even manipulated. So, as his career went on, it wasn't just about policy anymore. His time in office started getting all tangled up in these personal scandals and mounting legal troubles. Right now, he is literally on trial, facing some very serious charges: bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. In one case, he's accused of taking almost $300,000 in lavish gifts. They even had code names: leaves for cigars and roses for champagne. In other cases, he's accused of trading political favors for positive media coverage. Now, for his part, Netanyahu denies everything. And look, we're not talking about a slap on the wrist here. If he gets convicted on the bribery charge, he could be looking at up to 10 years in prison. So you can see why staying in power, staying prime minister, is so incredibly important to him on a very personal level. And all these scandals, they had a huge political fallout. Mainstream parties started saying, no way, we're not working with you. So, to get back into power, he had to make some new friends, and he turned to the most extreme fringes of Israeli politics. His current government, the one he put together in late 2022, is the most right-wing in Israel's entire history. And just look at his key partners. You've got Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, who actually has past convictions for supporting a terrorist group and inciting racism. You have Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, a self-described proud homophobe, and then there are the ultra-Orthodox parties with their own very specific agendas. And if you want to understand the ideology driving this government, just listen to this quote from Smotrich, his finance minister. It's about as blunt as it gets.
So one of the first things this new government tried to do was this massive overhaul of the country's entire judicial system. And boy, did that cause an explosion. Critics screamed that it was a straight-up attack on democracy, a power grab to weaken the Supreme Court, and, well, a weaker court could be very convenient for a prime minister who happens to be on trial. This whole thing literally tore the country in two, sparking the biggest protests Israel had ever seen.
And all of that turmoil leads us right up to the current moment, to the crisis that began with the horrific Hamas attack on October 7th.
Now, to really get what's going on, you have to look back. For years, critics say Netanyahu's government had this strategy. They let money from Qatar flow to Hamas in Gaza. The thinking, according to these critics, was to keep Hamas propped up, which would keep the Palestinian leadership divided. And a divided Palestinian leadership can't really negotiate for a state, right? Well, a lot of people are now saying that strategy didn't just fail. It blew up in Israel's face in the most catastrophic way imaginable. The devastating war that followed has absolutely tanked his reputation on the world stage. Just look at this recent poll from the US. Only 21% of Americans have a favorable view of him now.
And here's the real irony. The one thing Netanyahu has spent his entire career fighting against, a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, while support for that very idea in the US has now jumped to 58%, a clear majority. So this leaves everyone with this really intense, painful debate. On one side, his supporters say, look, he's doing what he has to do to keep Israel safe. But on the other side, his critics, and that includes a massive protest movement inside Israel, are saying something totally different. They're accusing him of dragging out this war for his own political survival, to keep his extremist coalition happy, to stay in power, and to keep that corruption trial from ever reaching a verdict.
And that leaves us with the big question, the one that hangs over everything. In this moment of absolute crisis for his country, who is Benjamin Netanyahu really looking out for? Is it the Israeli people, or is it just himself?